Yo, what is up guys? Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So of course this past weekend on the undercard of Josh Taylor versus Eko Esserman, Moses Itauma resumed his heavyweight career, fighting Mike Balogun and beating Mike Balogun in 2 rounds. Mike Balogun, of course, an American heavyweight on the regional scene out there. Not really beaten anybody of note. I think he knocked out one of Tommy Morrison's sons, Trey Lippe, or the other one. He's got a couple of sons who boxed. But Mike Balogun, very low-level heavyweight, 40 plus years old, turned to boxing late. I believe he was a former NFL player or an American football player, something along those lines. And yeah, this fight ended as predictably as we all expected, really. Balogun not seeing out the second round. Moses Itauma doing what he needed to do against a very low level of opponent. In fact, the opponent choice for me was very disappointing, considering Itauma prior to this fought the Australian geezer. His name escapes me. Dempsey McKean, who, you know, not a great fighter in his own right, but a guy who gave Hrgovic a pretty decent fight, went rounds with Hrgovic, gave him some hard moments. Not a great fighter, but at that point in time in Moses Itauma's career, I felt that was a good fight for him, a decent opponent for him. Mike Balogun, for me, was a step backwards. Got stopped in 2 rounds, like I said. Dropped in the first round with an overhand left that didn't even properly land. He kind of landed the palm of the glove on the side of Balogun's head. That dropped Balogun, but you know, Balogun beat the count, but ultimately the writing was on the wall from the opening seconds of his fight, because Itauma, fighting out of that southpaw stance, was able to pull with a jab, get his distance, and find a home for that straight left almost immediately. And, you know, prior to the knockdown, he caught Balogun a couple of times with that left hand, and Balogun certainly felt it. He couldn't get away from it. After Balogun got dropped, he does beat the count. He continues into round 2. But, you know, he's forcing his work. He's reaching in with punches. It kind of looks like he's trying to catch Itauma with a Hail Mary punch. He proceeds to get dropped twice more. Final knockdown was quite nice. Balogun kind of lunged in with a jab. Then he tried to follow through with with a straight right hand. Moses Itauma, half step back, right hook counter, bang on the chin. It drops Balogun face first. And yeah, that was all she wrote. But yeah, Balogun very porous defensively. You know, 41 years old. Just really was really made to order for Moses Itauma to make him look good, and you know that's exactly what happened. So, in regards to performance, doesn't really prove much, but you know Itauma did what he's supposed to do in these sort of fights, and that is look good. And I think Itauma showed that. You know, I think he did that in this fight. A lot of people were talking about Itauma on social media after this bout, so from that perspective, it was a successful night's work. But a lot of hype now for Moses Itauma, a lot of hype building, and the matchmaking going forwards is going to be key. I think he's a very talented fighter. I think that's clear. He's got good athletic ability, decent speed, both hand speed and foot speed. Seems to have pretty decent reaction times as well. Relatively decent punch technique for a young heavyweight. He can lead and he can counter. Seems to have decent power. There's a lot going for Moses Itauma, and like I said, he's still very young, 20 years old. But, you know, with the level of hype that he's getting, I think it's only right for us to start expecting step-ups. And I'm not somebody who wants to see him go in there with Tyson Fury next, you know. But step-ups relative to where he's at, step-ups that will take him through the levels, I think that's now required. None of these sort of made-to-order guys. And don't get me wrong, when I say step-ups, Moses Itauma is still going to be expected to win these sort of fights, but fighters who can take him rounds, fighters who can show him different looks, fighters who are not going to give him the knockout on a plate. So going forwards, for me, and I think the commentary team mentioned it, or the analyst team on DAZN, they mentioned Jermaine Franklin as a potential opponent for Moses Itauma. Now, I think Jermaine Franklin would be a pretty good opponent, because, listen, we've seen from Franklin in the AJ fight and the Dillian White fight, he lost both fights, went the distance both times. In fact, some people felt he beat Dillian. I felt Dillian White beat Jermaine Franklin, but, Franklin put up a good show in both fights. He showed he was defensively capable, showed he had a good chin, and he threw back on occasion. A guy who can go rounds, a guy who is relatively well schooled. He seems to be one of those sort of fighters that has had a lot of good sparring over the years, probably a very effective sparring partner, being around the block kind of thing. And I think Moses Itauma needs that sort of opponent, because Franklin fits that bill, and I think he'll still come there with ambition as well, which is what you want to see. You want to see these young prospects get tested in fights that they can and should win to get them that experience. I think Jermaine Franklin would be ideal, personally, especially from a marketing perspective. You can sell Jermaine Franklin on what he did in the AJ and Dillian White fights, and should Itauma do better, should Itauma get the stoppage, well, that's great for his marketing, but I would suspect that Jermaine Franklin would take Itauma some rounds, and I think that's what he needs. When he went rounds early in his career against Dobchenko, and I think it was an Argentinian journeyman, there was a lot of critics for Moses Itauma, but I thought those fights at that time were good for him to go over rounds, not to have somebody fall over, and I think he now needs that again, but at a higher level. I think Jermaine Franklin would serve that purpose perfectly. Even a guy like Murat Gassiev, a guy who, former cruiserweight world champion, he's been campaigning at heavyweight for a little while now, and while he's certainly not developed into the heavyweight that I thought he would, I actually thought he would do a lot better at heavyweight, considering the power he's got and the basic fundamentals, good guard, etc. He's not developed into the heavyweight I expected, but he's still a name, and I still think he is somebody who can go rounds with Itauma. Plus, there's a bit of risk factor there because of Gassiev's power, so there would be question marks there. There would be something to overcome. Maybe there's a bit of pressure there. I think maybe Franklin, then Gassiev would be good. People are mentioning Otto Wallin. I see where they're coming from, but I think Otto Wallin now has burnt his bridges. I don't think that guy will come to win. He might spoil. He might still go a few rounds, but I don't think he's going to ask any questions, whereas I think a guy like Franklin will have his moments or try to incorporate himself into the fight. I don't think Otto Wallin will do that. I just think he'll turn up for a payday, personally. So I don't really like the Otto Wallin fight. To me, the Derek Chisora fight was the final nail in the coffin for him. He turned up and he didn't try, as far as I'm concerned. So I'd rather not see Otto Wallin in there with Moses Itauma. I understand why they may go down that route, but I'd rather not see it. I'd rather see someone like Jermaine Franklin, a guy who I think will be more grateful for the opportunity and will probably try and do more with it, But again, a fight in which Itauma should still win, I think, in Jermaine Franklin. But the hype is now officially here, I think, for Itauma. And for me, when you get to a certain level of hype, I think it is imperative that you begin to step up. Again, I'm not saying he needs to go in there with a top 3 heavyweight next, but, just guys who we're familiar with, guys who have something about them. And I think Jermaine Franklin, followed by a Murat Gassiev, would be decent. That would be pretty good for me. They're also mentioning Martin Bakole. If he were to fight Bakole next, despite Bakole's recent last 2 fights, I'd be happy with that. I'd be very happy with that. So, these are the sort of fights I'd like for Moses Itauma, that I'd like to see from him. Again, the hype is there. I think it's now time to start going through the levels. People are already mentioning his name up there with the likes of Usyk, Dubois, Fury. Pump the brakes. Let's see him fight guys who are mid-tier, like fringe contenders, then go into contender status, lower level contenders, then actual real contenders, like top 10 guys. There's still a long way to go with Moses Itauma. Future looks bright, but we've seen this with heavyweights before. Heavyweight prospects. How's he going to react when he gets caught? How's he going to react when it's a hard fight and it's going rounds and the guy isn't falling over? There's a lot of question marks still that haven't been answered. But the initial signs with Itauma are definitely positive. But let's see him, step through the levels first before we start anointing him, the next, whatever, Mike Tyson, Lennox Lewis, Usyk, etc. We'll see. We'll see how it pans out. But certainly going to be interesting following his career going forwards. But I think the matchmaking now needs to step up a tad. Anyway, share your thoughts below. Beanie Guy Del Boy. Peace.